Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'll start by going over our plan for today, like what is our agenda ultimately. So, of course, we'll start with a brief introduction of myself and Will just in a second. Then we'll go over kind of key challenges of social impact measurement evaluation, so including understanding of key terms and discussion of frameworks and standards, as well as some insights into creating and organizing metrics and indicators. We'll, of course, talk about the course. We'll have a little case study to sort of show you our approach to teaching this course. And of course, at the end, we'll do a little Q&A as well. So, well, I am Alex Mazanek, and I'm joined today by my colleague, William Shadden. And together, we spend years working in social impact measurement and reporting across non-for-profits, businesses, community initiatives. And what we've learned is that impact measurement can feel kind of intimidating at first. There's lots of jargon, frameworks, terms, data points, etc. But ultimately, at its core, it's really about telling a clear story of change. And that's where we come in. So, our goal in this course is to translate those complex ideas into straightforward, practical tools you can actually use and understand, no matter your background. So, whether you're leading a business, running a non-for-profit, or just curious about impact, I think there's something in this course for you that will resonate. Before we dive in a little bit deeper, I think it's just worth pausing kind of why we're all here and why social impact matters. And at its heart, it's about making sure that the work we do creates real positive change, not just activity. And measuring impact helps us build trust with stakeholders, use resources more wisely, and connect social good with stronger business outcomes. And ultimately, it ensures that we can show in clear terms that our efforts are actually making a difference. Tiny bit on CRG, Context Research Group, which is Will and I's business. At CRG, our work combines decades of expertise and social impact with a focus on making measurement approachable and meaningful. So we've supported social purpose organizations and funders in evaluating impact, designing strategies, and communicating clearly to all of their stakeholders. Alongside this advisory work, we also developed Amplify, which is our impact measurement software, and Amplify was built really with one goal in mind, to make impact measurement reporting as simple as it can be. It's easy to use, so whether you're just starting with evaluation or you've been doing it for years, this tool makes the process simpler and keeps things meaningful. Of course, and finally, another thing I want to make here is that Amplify is aligned with the Common Impact Data Standard, which means the data can be shared and compared easily across other aligned organizations, of course, saving time and increasing consistency. So just a tiny bit about us. That's who we are. That's kind of what we're busy doing a day in and day out. Also our background. And of course, that approach of making impact measurement really easy to understand in simple terms is kind of what brings us to this course. And that's where our passion is ultimately, is in making it very easy to understand. And because of that, I want to start with just a discussion and overview and some key terms. Like, why are we starting with key terms? It seems kind of boring, but ultimately we know what we know about the social impact space is that people come from a variety of sectors, variety of businesses, and sort of non-business environments, right? So public sector, and we understand that people speak different languages ultimately, and sometimes even terms, they mean different things to different people. We'll start with some easy ones here just to get us on the same page. So social purpose organization, SPO, it's of course any organization that intentionally pursues positive social and or environmental outcome. What will be an example of that? We'll be working through a little case study at the end, so we'll have a theme going here, but it's a community home, for an example, a community homeless shelter that provides emergency beds and case management to help people move into stable housing. Now, a funder, this is an entity that supplies financial or in-kind resources to an SPO's initiative. Now, a funder could kind of have different shapes, right? It could be an external funder, so a government foundation, or it could be internal, so corporate budget, board allocation. An example we're working here, which is deeply hypothetical, municipal housing department awards a $250,000 grant to expand a shelter's rapid rehousing program, and then the shelter's board approves an additional $15,000 from reserves. These two are pretty easy, but again, just to put us on the same key terms. Now, this is where things maybe get a little bit more complicated, and we'll start talking about framework, standards, and taxonomy. You'll see that sometimes these falsely are used sort of interchangeably. Like we'll talk about framework or standard, but really they do mean different things. And I want to kind of create that distinction early on, and hopefully maybe even clears up a few things for some individuals here. And so a framework, right? High-level guidance that organizes what good impact practice looks like. So goals, themes, outcomes, and helps align language and priorities, but doesn't prescribe exact measures. That's key. The key thing here between the difference between framework and standard does not prescribe exact measures. An example would be the program aligns its housing initiative with UN SDG 11, which is sustainable cities and communities, and uses that to frame goals around access to adequate, safe, and affordable housing. Let's move on to the standard. So a standard is a more prescriptive set of requirements or taxonomies that specify what to measure and how to calculate and report it. So enabling comparability across organizations. Here, we're going to use an example of IRIS Plus. So to select standardized indicators for households placed into stable housing with defined formulas and evidence requirements so results are comparable to peer programs. Last on the slide, I have taxonomy. So this is a more prescriptive set of requirements or taxonomies that specify what to measure and how to calculate and report it. So in short, just to kind of frame it here, framework is broad guidance, sort of what matters. Standard, prescriptive rules for what, how to measure. And taxonomy is sort of the vocabulary you actually apply to label and organize your data. So hopefully this helps us clear up some of these basic terms. And last one is outcome, indicator, and metric. And so outcome, this is the meaningful change in people's lives or systems that the initiative aims to achieve. So status, behavior, condition, not just the activities delivered. All right, and so an example here would be households exiting homelessness, maintain stable housing for at least 12 months. Now, an indicator, a specific sign of progress toward an outcome. So often expressed that as a rate, proportion, or score that you can track over time. And I have an example there in percentages. And finally, a metric is a raw, countable data point collected through measurement, and metrics feed indicators and together evidence outcomes. So I just wanted to establish this kind of chain from sort of highest level to the lowest level, where the metric is a specific raw data point that we kind of roll up through indicator towards an outcome. And again, just clarifying these early on because, again, sometimes these terms are used kind of loosely and people maybe get confused regarding what they actually mean. But for the purposes of today's session and just kind of going forward, wanted to put these up front and get synced up on these terms.
Alex, can I ask you to go to the previous slide? Because Lynn's asking, are the definitions of standards and taxonomy meant to be the same? And I think you've got a typo here. So if you
I think I might have a duplication here. So sorry, they're not. So like a taxonomy is more of like a vocabulary. So it's a more specific way, like guidelines that you apply to actually label and organize your data. So whereas a standard tells you what indicators to use and how to use them, taxonomy is more of a vocabulary that you layer on top of that. And I apologize for the duplication there. Okay. Next thing, so wanted to get on the same page regarding kind of the simple terms and the language that we're going to use. The next is sort of key challenges that we wanted to pay attention to. And the reason why basically this course exists is the key challenges of social impact and why social impact is ultimately hard. In signing up for this course, you've provided a few sort of questions as to what you're hoping to take away from this session, and also kind of revealed like what are sort of some of the challenges that you're experiencing with social impact. And this next section would try to organize all of that and show you how we would address it as part of this course. And the reality is that this work that we're doing is challenging even for seasoned practitioners, right? First, there's sort of framework standards overload. So there's SDGs, IRS Plus, SASB, GRI, CIW, SROI. So each useful, but together they can create duplication and confusion. Second, there's reporting requirements conflict, right? So different funders want different indicators, formats, and cadences, which can make it feel like you're rebuilding your system every quarter, you're adjusting constantly, right? And last is always balancing quantitative rigor with qualitative richness. So on the one hand, you need trustworthy numbers, but we also need the context and voices behind those numbers. So we'll go through these challenges one by one right now. Okay, so first we'll talk about framework and standards, overload and maybe kind of initial confusion around them. And again, if we kind of feel buried in acronyms, you're not alone. And ultimately, the fix is to choose intentionally, not exhaustively. So first is purpose and audience, right? Are you informing community partners, investors, a board, or government? That choice narrows down your options. And then we have the 1-1-1 rule. Choose one framework to frame goals, one standard to make measures comparable, finally, one data standard to move data cleanly, right? So in this case, it would be, for example, SGG or CIW, IRS Plus for indicators or SASB, and one data standard. So for example, Common Impact Data Standard. Then core and crosswalk. So keep an internal core of indicator library. So these are your stable IDs, definitions, disaggregation rules, and then create a crosswalk that maps each internal indicator to whatever external standard a stakeholder needs. All right, so ultimately you measure once, but you report in many different ways. So you create a core and you create a crosswalk connection that maps that out to anything else that it needs to be. And finally, of course, kind of document your choices, avoid chasing every acronym like we said at the beginning of this slide, kind of create guardrails, review annually, add only if a new framework clearly improves decision-making and credibility, otherwise you risk duplication and confusion. Okay, challenge 2, conflicting reporting requirements, right? How do we meet different funders' reporting asks without rebuilding our system every time, right? And it's common for funders to want different formats, timeframes, or even different definitions. And the goal is to standardize upstream so you can customize downstream. And you're probably picking up on this from the previous slide already as well. So kind of item number 1 here is have a master data dictionary, one source of truth for definitions, formulas, disaggregation, and data owners. Have a funder matrix, a simple tracker listing each funder's required indicators, cadence, file type, and narrative elements. This becomes your kind of reporting calendar and prevents last-minute scrambles. Have a translation layer. So keep your internal indicators stable, then map them to each funder's template, right? And this is also the crosswalk from challenge 1, like we talked about. And if a funder asks for slightly different wording, you translate, you don't recollect the data, right? So again, it's kind of keeping your core and then translating it out. Finally, the 90-10 rule, you aim for a 90% overlap with your core set and treat 10% as funder-specific add-ons. And if a request is costly or low value, you can kind of negotiate, propose a near equivalent, you already collect, and explain the comparability, right? And finally, kind of the evidence package. Pair numbers with short narrative, method notes, and limitations. This transparency ultimately builds trust, especially with methods when methods differ across funders. And the last item here, the challenges that we wanted to tackle, is balancing quantitative and qualitative data. How do we keep rigor and capture real stories and context? Is sort of common question we hear, and I think a few people brought it up for this session as well. So numbers show how much, and stories show what those numbers mean, right? And you need both of those components. So tip number 1 here is, approach number 1 is mix methods on purpose. So for each priority outcome, define a quantitative indicator and at least one qualitative companion, right? And use them to triangulate findings. The 3-2-1 rule. So for a given outcome, track 3 metrics, 2 qualitative signals, and 1 narrative case that illustrates the pattern. Of course, every case is different, but just wanted to exemplify that, provide an example. So rigor without burden. Keep instruments short, use consistent prompts, and code themes with a simple taxonomy so qualitative data can be analyzed systematically. check inter-rater reliability if multiple coders and tagging themes. So, but ultimately the point here is make it easy to code qualitative data consistently. Sensitive contexts, of course, use trauma-informed practices, informed consent, voluntary participation, minimal necessary data, safe timing, and options for anonymity, and report with integrity. So present the quantitative trend and the qualitative explanation side by side, be explicit about limitations, so sample size, bias, missing data, things like that. Okay, so we looked at several acronyms, right? And ultimately, I think we might have skipped one slide, I'm not sure. But we wanted to, yeah, that's right, thank you. So here we're looking at simple acronyms, and again, we're getting into discussion of frameworks and standards and what they mean and how they work. And here we're presenting just a few here, right? Like what are SDGs, IRIS+, SRI, so on and so forth. And ultimately, as we know, SDGs give us what matter kind of at a global level. So like we have the 17 goals. IRIS Plus gives us what to measure, a catalog of standardized impact indicators. GRI and SASB guide how to disclose results to the outside world. CIW offers a well-being lens tailored to Canada. And finally, SRI is a method to value outcomes in monetary terms when that's useful. And we'll just get into a few highlights in the next few slides, and then Will is going to walk us through a little bit further as well. So of course, most people will be familiar with this. So framework example is our UN Sustainable Development Goals. The SDGs are 17 global goals adopted by all UN members states in 2015, a shared blueprint to guide action on poverty, health, education, climate, and more. And many organizations map their initiatives and indicators to relevant SDGs. So for example, housing program to SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities. And alignment doesn't replace good indicators. It simply anchors your work in a widely recognized language. And Will is going to walk us through a little bit deeper on that in a moment. And here's a standards example, right? So whereas UN SDGs is a framework example, standards example is IRIS+. It's a widely used catalog of standardized indicators maintained by Global Impact Investing Network, and it helps you pick comparable, well-defined measures, often bundled into core metric sets, and align them with themes and SDGs. And in practice, what would happen is you'd select a small core set from IRIS+, then add any context-specific metrics, and this keeps your data comparable across programs and funders while staying practical. So just wanted to give you kind of a key terms overview, understanding of challenges that you face as practitioners, and of course, just a brief overview of sort of framework and standards that we'll be touching on in this session. And over to you, Will.
Thanks, Alex. Hi, everyone. I'm William Shatton, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the structure of the course, and then I'll walk us through a small little demo case study example of how we're going to kind of practically apply some of these concepts that Alex has been introducing us to in kind of a practical, tangible way. So before we dive into that, again, just want to kind of give an overview of how we're approaching this module, this course. And really, this course is designed for kind of three types of stakeholders. Really, it's around social purpose organizations, funders of social initiatives, or consultants, just general kind of impact evaluation practitioners or those curious about the practices. And kind of each of these different roles play a different role in the social impact ecosystem, but also they share a common challenge, right? Which is, how do we select, the right metrics and indicators that are both kind of meaningful and practical and are connected to what is a logic model. And a logic model is kind of really explored in the module 2, the preceding module that leads into this course. So we're really going to kind of build on that knowledge. And our goals are kind of simple, but also ambitious. It's we want to build your fluency or our participants' fluency in the language of impact measurement, right? So when you hear terms like outputs, outcomes, indicators, metrics, you'll feel confident applying them and understanding them and engaging in that conversation. Second, we're going to build up skills by actually practicing the process of moving from a logic model into a set of concrete measures, right? And third, we're going to strengthen your confidence in navigating frameworks, because funders, partners, boards, standardized reporting requirements often expect alignment with standards, frameworks, or taxonomies. So by the end, you'll feel really prepared to handle these conversations and deliver this type of practical engagement with social impact measurement. So by the time you wrap up, you'll have kind of really three key takeaways and tangible kind of components that you would have engaged with and delivered on. The first is, a 3 to 5 indicator set directly mapped out to a logic model, right? So you'll understand how to choose metrics which inform indicators which are connected to a logic model. And again, I'll give you a high level case study that kind of practically shows what this is in a moment. If this is a little confusing or overwhelming for you, hopefully that kind of shows you exactly what it is we're talking about here. And finally, you'll see how you build out a data pipeline, right? So we're talking about all these metrics that you can capture, right? But practically where are you getting this data from, right? What are those? Is this data you're collecting yourself, or you're working with partners to collect internal data, external data, participant data, right? So you have to kind of consider how are you informing and sourcing this information that you're hoping to report on, right? So in short, this isn't a deeply theoretical course, right? You're going to walk away from this course with concrete tools that you can apply the next day, right? So let's take a look at a little bit of a deeper dive on kind of what you're going to learn and how you're going to get there. And first, as I said, previous module, you'll be exploring logic models. So you'll be able to kind of, in our course, create a short list of candidate indicators that will help inform that logic model, right? So instead of being overwhelmed by dozens of possibilities, we'll help you kind of learn to focus on what is a manageable set, right? What Alex was referring to, kind of the core set. And we'll, kind of examine this using what we call like an indicator quality rubric, right? So developing a robust kind of framework to evaluate different indicators and different metrics, right? To help you make, informed decisions as you navigate that process. Second, you're going to be able to write proper indicator formats, right? So I know, some of you may not necessarily be super excited about diving into, going into math, but we're not doing in-depth calculus or algebra here. It's very kind of rudimentary high school level stuff, but it's still important, especially as we're getting into kind of evaluating metrics, calculating and reporting on impact measurement, right? We need to be confident in the information that we're preparing and ultimately presenting and reporting. But this isn't a super math focused course, but we are just going to revisit your high school math knowledge. And then third, you'll design a mini data plan, right? So this, as I mentioned previously, kind of includes identifying the data sources, how is it collected, what's the cadence of the collection, how big, what's the sample size, robustness of that data, how accurate is it real data, forecasted data, baseline data. We'll talk about all these different terms, make sure you understand it, so you understand what a robust data plan looks like. So you can either develop one, or, if one comes across your desk, you can, really comprehensively evaluate a data plan and provide input on things like this. And finally, you'll learn how to crosswalk your chosen indicators to recognize standards, right? So Alex is talking about crosswalking. So again, in the real world, you want a core library of metrics and data points, and you're going to be thrown different reporting requirements, right? Throughout any kind of typical kind of life cycle of a social purpose program, whether you're a funder or an SPO, right? Whatever the case may be, there's often these different kind of requirements that get thrown your way, right? So again, leaning into that kind of core data set that you have, how can you crosswalk and map out that data to meet these different requirements, right? And how do you evaluate those requests? So in short, ultimately, you're going to leave not only knowing kind of what to measure, but also how to define it, how to collect it, and ultimately how to communicate it in a way that, different funders, different stakeholders can trust. And just a few words here on the course here and our approach to the course, and then I'll dive into a case study. But ultimately, our approach, Alex and I's approach, as hopefully is kind of coming through here, it's really practical. It's really hands-on. We're grounded in our real-world experience as impact evaluation practitioners and consultants. So it's directly tied into some of the challenges that we've helped our clients face and grapple with over the years. So this course really is practice first, right? We're not here to kind of overwhelm you with jargon or abstract theoretical kind of frameworks. Instead, we're going to dive into kind of concrete exercises, concrete examples from day one. So you're really applying what we're going to kind of teach and learn, and you're learning in this course. So to make this real, we've designed kind of practical activities like a framework carousel, evaluating different kind of frameworks. We're going to explore and compare metric matchmaking, right? Doing these example kind of crosswalking exercises. And all of these are designed to give you kind of the structure and interactive experience using these different tools and approaches that you'll be able to immediately apply outside of this course, right? And then in addition to that, we're going to bring in some real world examples. So we'll talk about some of the experiences that we've had, some case studies we've had. We have some guest speakers who are going to come and talk about the challenges that they face in their organizations today that are related to the content of the course, provide you with some case studies and be available to kind of answer questions as well. And then everything kind of culminates in a capstone project where you can kind of take everything you've learned and apply it end to end, identifying relevant frameworks, standards, selecting metrics and indicators, and building out a data pipeline that would inform that, and all connected to a logic model. And we're flexible, like we can help you if you bring in your own logic model. We can help you kind of map that out to an established logic model, or we can give you example logic models you can build off of, depending on kind of what your needs are, what your situation is. But again, all this, if appropriate, if we can, we want to apply this to real world issues that you may be grappling with. Okay. So let's just give you a case study. So this is all theoretical. We're just going to give you. We're going to pretend today that we are a SPO, a social purpose organization, right? So we are a social purpose organization operating in the city of Toronto, and our mandate is to reduce housing insecurity, right? So that's our initiative. And we have two key programs. We have one program that focuses on expanding shelters, so providing beds within shelters and expanding those types of programs. And then we have another initiative that's a rent subsidy program, right, to help vulnerable populations, vulnerable groups, subsidize their rent to get them kind of out of the shelter and transitioning kind of into that next step. And some of the challenges and issues we might face is, our funder who's providing us with some funding says, how are you measuring and reporting your impact, right? If I'm giving you X amount of dollars to support these initiatives, I really like this. It fits within our kind of, our logic model as a funder to fund these types of initiatives, right? How are you going to report back to us on how you're utilizing this funding most effectively, all right? So we need to think about what types of frameworks we're going to use, what types of kind of indicators and standards we're going to report on to give that funding initiative back. We're kind of starting from ground zero. Let's say we're a new SPO, right? And as Alex mentioned, we also want to balance our qualitative versus our quantitative, right? So keep in mind, we're not a broad spectrum social purpose organization where we're Gen Pop, like serving the general population. Our focus is on a very targeted, like maybe perhaps a very vulnerable community. Let's go, it is Truth and Reconciliation Day. Let's say we're focusing on Indigenous individuals located within the city of Toronto, right? So as a result of that, maybe our impact, we're not generating the largest number of rent subsidy programs because there's just not a massive volume of Indigenous, people's facing housing insecurity issues in the city of Toronto versus a general, like comparing with a general population program, their numbers might be significantly higher versus ours is very targeted on a specific vulnerable group. So our numbers are lower. So we have to provide kind of maybe qualitative kind of measures to kind of provide context and nuance to why, our numbers are perhaps lower than a general population program, but, it's serving a very kind of immediate need for a very kind of vulnerable community. So that's kind of the framework for who we are to think about this case study. So here's a high level logic model, right? Logic models can be slightly different, take different shapes and forms, but ultimately they usually boil down to 5 key categories. And again, our goal in this course isn't diving into what logic models are. That's the previous module. Module 2 is really focusing on that. So we're going to leverage that knowledge and build that out and talk about how can we connect data points to a logic model, right? The 5 key components of a logic model are inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact, right? And inputs are really kind of your internal resources that you're applying as an SPO, right? So what internal resources in SPO are we applying to this? The activities are the practical things that our SPO is doing, right? So what are the actual activities that we're doing? And I'll show you some examples of it for our case study in a moment for all of these. And then outputs are kind of what are the kind of, well, pretty self-explanatory, but what are the outputs of our activities, right? And then how do these tie into our goals or our outcomes, right? And then ultimately, what is our big kind of umbrella impact that we're working towards, right? So using the example of our case study here, right, let's take a look at what some of these might be, right? And again, focus of our module is tying data into this. So we're just kind of setting the scene here for what a logic model might look like. Next, I'll start talking about how we kind of can start piping in different frameworks, different metrics into this logic model. So at a very high level, inputs are, our funding, the staff members that we're applying to our program, and different partnerships that we have in the community to help us with our activities, which are, again, excuse me, expanding shelters and delivering rent subsidies, right? So those are the two programs that we're offering in our case study. And what are the outputs of these two programs, right? So obviously we want to increase the number of beds in these shelters, want to increase the number of individuals housed, whether that's in a shelter or in a subsidized rent program. And then obviously we're issuing rent subsidies, right? And these activities and outputs and inputs are all working towards a set of outcomes, right? That we want to define in our logic model, which is more people are safely sheltered, they have stable kind of tenancies maintained, and we're reducing returns to housing insecurity, right? This program is kind of set up to transition people from being, very housing insecure to on their way into having housing security. And ultimately, what's the impact that we're trying to achieve? It's reducing housing insecurity and kind of reducing chronic persons without housing in the city of Toronto, and specifically Indigenous individuals within the city, right? So that's, again, just setting the scene here. This is our logic model. So let's kind of think about and explore now some of these frameworks that Alex mentioned. So Alex mentioned the United Nations Social Development Goals, so UN SDGs. I'm going to flip over to their website and share that screen. Here, share. Okay. So Alex, is the UN SDG? Give me a thumbs up if this is flipped over. Yeah, Catherine. Yeah, perfect. Okay. So this is the United Nations UN SDGs. You may be familiar with this already. If not, we'll dive into this a little bit in our course. But basically, there's 17 high-level goals. You can see them on the screen here. Now, as our kind of housing insecurity SPO in our case study, right? Which of these are most relevant to us, right? And just very quickly, we'll just go off the title of them, but you can click on them to get, do a deep dive and learn more about these. But reduction in poverty, so that is, I think, a part of the activities that we're doing. So I think number one, end poverty in its forms everywhere would apply to us. We're not a hunger component or good health and well-being. We're not touching, education or gender equality or clean water, right? Scrolling through these others, we're not touching work or employment or infrastructure. Reducing inequalities, I think this could be a component as well. And then obviously we're directly touching kind of housing, which is goal number 11, make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, and resilient and sustainable. So that one for sure as well. And then the others, it's climate, water, life on land, peace and justice partnerships. So I think, number one, number two, number 10 would apply to us. And that's, again, at a very high level. We can, in the course, we'll dive much deeper into this conversation and evaluating these. But at a surface level right now, off our initial scan, these three definitely apply. Let's maybe dive into number 11. So if we click kind of more info, well, just on its card, you can see that within this goal, there's 10 different targets. There's publications and actions and events around this. So you can really kind of, if you're in this space and this goal is connected to the work you're doing, you can really kind of stay connected through the UN SDG program on learning about different initiatives related to this SDG. But if we click on it here, we can kind of see more about it, learn more about it. But you can see this is, so keep in mind, this is a framework, right? The UN SDGs are more of a framework. So they're more broad. They're not necessarily prescriptive on how you measure progress towards this this initiative right here, right? This goal. But I will show you on their site, they do provide kind of targets and indicators, right? So they do kind of break it down into specific targets. So this is goal number 11 for the UNSDG. So they have, a specific target, 11.1. I think there's 10 different targets here. But by 2030, ensure adequate safe housing. And they do provide some high level indicators here. So 11.1.1.1, the proportion of urban population living in slums, informal settlements, and inadequate housing. So if you did kind of want to measure an indicator specifically for this target, here's what you could do. But you see they're pretty light on providing any data-driven kind of measures or metrics here. We have some high level kind of targets, high level indicators within, but it's really not giving you any sort of detail on how you measure impact towards this, right? So typically, thinking back to our logic model, we would tie in these frameworks and say, hey, as our housing insecurity SPO in Toronto, working with Indigenous residents, we're working towards goal 11, goal 1, maybe goal 10 on UN SDGs. So that's kind of as far as you can take it. When now our next step is, how do we measure our progress? Like, do we think these goals from this framework align with our kind of impact and the outcomes we're working towards? But how do we measure all of these things? All right, so that's where we would kind of then transition over to Iris Plus, right? And Iris Plus, let's see, pull up you can see that Iris Plus provides, they have a library of metrics, right? So they're really getting into the weeds on specific data points that you can capture. They've got them kind of categorized, and what you'll notice is that they have built in, if you're using a framework, if you're using the UN SDG framework, you can already kind of isolate down by framework, right? So if we just say, yeah, we've identified that this particular UN SDG framework, Sustainable Cities and Community number 11, is aligned with our outcomes. So let's now look at, on the Iris Plus, kind of what are specific metrics that might speak to that. Right, and if we maybe just search for, let's just search household, and receiving products or services. So this one, client households provided, and again, we'll dive into these and help you kind of navigate Iris Plus a little bit more in the course. So I am doing kind of a bit of a speed run here on this, but households provided with new access, right? So it's pretty general. It's a kind of broad in its application, but it's the number of unique households where clients of our organization were provided access during the reported period to products or services they were unable to access prior to, right? So thinking specifically of our rent subsidy program here, right, where we are providing households with subsidized rent. So this household now has access to subsidized renting program that they were not able to access prior, right? So this would be a count of the number of subsidized households who were provided with our new access to our rent subsidy program, right? So, it gives information on this. It gives you access to different resources related to this metric. Kind of gives you details on the type of metric it is, gives you details on how to use this metric, so how to report on it, guidance on how to measure it. Also, again, ties into this metric can report up to a variety of different things. Like, it is pretty broad spectrum, like provided with new access, could be new access to multitude of different types of programs. But right, you can see that it ties into this overall goal and even sub targets within that UN SDG goal, right? So a different way of doing it now, there's another, if we do, so that was new access, provided new access. I just want to show you one of the challenges. If we just search for provided new access, you can see that provided new access is also a metric that can be measured at the client level, which means the individual level, right? So number of clients that were served and provided with access to, housing unit. And this is a difference here. These are two different things, right? So both of these could be applied to our rent subsidy program in our case study. But one is measuring individuals whereas another is measuring households, right? And we may want to collect and report on both because they tell two different things, right? A household can contain multiple individuals, right? So although maybe we're funding 100 households, right? Some of those households may be a single adult, a couple, or a family of 4 or 6, right? So this measure, the number of clients served, can capture the total number of people that are provided with a rent subsidy program. Whereas the previous measure we're looking at would provide the number of households that are subsidized by this rent program, right? So they are two different things. They sound very similar, but we have to be careful about how we are measuring, capturing, and reporting on these two different things that are very closely related, right? But tell two different stories, right? So again, some of the nuance here, some of the intricacies of choosing the right measure. We're seeing obviously there's kind of broad applicability here on some of these metrics that we've been looking at, right? So that's just an example of some of the things that we'll dive into in this course and help you map these out, navigate these different decisions. And ultimately, what it comes down to is that you need to start making some judgment calls, right? What is the best metric for me to report that ties into my indicators and complements my logic model and allows me to measure my outcomes and report up to the different, stakeholders I need to report to, right? And ultimately, it comes down to you need to rationalize why you've made these decisions. And there aren't necessarily right or wrong answers for a lot of these decisions that can be made. There are many ways that you can go about this, but you need to just provide that rationale as to why this is the way you are doing it and be prepared to kind of have those informed discussions. Maybe when people are suggesting alternatives or making different requests, and look at, can you adapt or adjust different things that you're doing and look at your core metrics when people are asking for different kind of reporting requirements. That's that kind of crosswalking exercise that we talked about. So I'm going to flip back to the last couple of slides here to wrap up and just talk about some of the high-level challenges that a social purpose organization may face. So I went through some examples of these in standardizing units, right? So we talked about families versus individuals versus units. So there's different kind of levels of measurement that mean different things. There's other challenges that we'll kind of dive into in this course, right? So actual versus forecast. So maybe your program is forecast to deliver 100 rent subsidies, but at the certain time where you're reporting, right, you've only actually implemented 50. Right? So how do you communicate actual versus forecast in these types of reports? We talk about ratio-based indicators. Again, that's diving a little bit into the high school math, but it's not going to be overwhelming, I promise. Looking at issues of double counting. So if you try to combine individuals and housing units, right, there's issues where you need to kind of be carefully consider how you report on things and how you aggregate or roll up all these little metrics that we're going to explore and provide kind of bigger level kind of reporting statistics on them, right? So making sure you're not double counting things or misrepresenting things, and ultimately aligning with different standards and frameworks for comparability. And just very quickly, just wanted to show you an example of, kind of an SPO to funder reporting flow, right? So this is separate from a logic model, but basically, an SPO is going to be working on activities, and we're going to help you navigate this kind of flow here in our module, right? So what are the activities that we're doing? So we'll look at your logic models, or give you some example logic models that we can work from, thinking about kind of what types of frameworks and standards would best apply for those logic models, and then what types of metrics and indicators, what types of data can we kind of use to inform those frameworks and standards and report on our outcomes. And then how can we kind of share these types of reports with different stakeholders, right? So how can, if we get some different requests for different types of reporting, how can we map out these indicators that we selected to meet these different types of requirements and requests? Okay, so coming to our conclusion here, if I had to kind of summarize what I hope the key takeaways are from today's session is, its impact measurement is complex, right? There's no easy answers here, but it's not impossible, right? So there are multiple frameworks. You're going to deal with different funder requests or different reporting requirements, whether they're internal or external. There's lots of moving pieces, right? But with the right tools and processes, it becomes something that you can manage and use rather than something that is overwhelming, right? And second, the frameworks or standards you choose, they need to kind of fit your context, right? There's flexibility there. They're pretty generally applicable. They're pretty broad spectrum, right? There's no single best framework. There's no single kind of right choice that you need to make. What matters is choosing what aligns with your mission, your stakeholders, and the outcomes that you care about. And that's why learning to navigate these frameworks with confidence is such an important skill. And third, kind of practice is what builds confidence here. So, through our course, you'll have the chance to do this exercise, right? To go through these decision-making processes, to look at different ways of evaluating what these competing kind of items are and making kind of informed, justified, rational decisions that you can discuss and defend if necessary. And finally, ultimately, and hopefully this has come through, there's no single right answer, right? Rarely, right? Instead, there's multiple good choices. So what matters is being able to explain your decisions clearly, why you chose one indicator over another, why you aligned to one framework over another, and how those choices kind of help you tell and communicate your impact story with credibility. Okay. We invite you to learn more. I think Catherine's shared in the chat several links, but please feel free to explore the social impact measurement certificate on the St. Mike CSR website. You can learn more about our module there as well. Otherwise, we have some time left today, so we're happy to open up to questions and answers. Happy to dive into anything that we've shared today or talk about anything that we're going to explore in the module. So please feel free to drop a question in the chat.
And I do have one question for you, William. Again, if anybody is sitting there and you're thinking your head is hurting, just remember crawl, walk, run. I mean, we're helping you to build your social impact measurement muscles. So, this was definitely the crawl level, and we're gonna keep building your muscles so that you can do it. Lynn is asking, any thoughts on the impact genome tool for comparison of nonprofit impact?
Yeah, I think so. Just to answer that question, I think in terms of like that tool, of course, it's kind of an interesting tool because it tries to create like a common language for outcomes across nonprofits, sort of like a DNA code for impact. The benefit here is comparability. But again, in the end of the day, I think it just goes to what Will has said. You need to assess fit, like ultimately, to pass judgment on this tool one way or another. Broadly speaking, without context is not what we're trying to do here. And I think it's part of what we're trying to convey is that within the correct circumstance, perhaps that is something that is appropriate to use, but it needs to be assessed on case-by-case basis.
So that goes back to, you have to understand the context of the situation to see whether or not things fit. Yeah. Other questions that people might have about either the program or what would happen in this session or anything that William and Alex just said that made you go, huh. It's interesting, if you can put your hand up or you can throw it in the chat. I guess the thing is, you can start to see why, because this body of knowledge is so complex, why it's necessary to have a certificate, why we built it into different modules that build on one another so that you can build those social impact muscles as you go along. Questions, anybody? All right. First, let me, before I wrap up and say thanks to William and Alex, just as a reminder, so if you're now intrigued, what the heck is a logic model and theory of change? Because clearly you need one to go in, and we can give you a case study that brings into this program. So into William and Alex's program, if you need a case study, but if you have a logic model, then you're well suited to join William and Alex on November 19th and 20th, and it's happening in person at the University of St. Michael's College. If you think you need to do that logic model and theory of change session, first, that actually starts online. So it's an online course that's happening for the next 5 weeks on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 12 until 1:30 Eastern time. And you'll be joining people from Sun Life and the City of Kingston, Kindred Credit Union, Evisio, City of Oshawa, Sustainalytics at that session, as well as some of the people that just came out of the module 1. And that starts, as I say, on the 7th of October. And yeah, there's still an opportunity as long as you register before Thursday to get into that course. And you probably have noticed there is a early registration deadline for William and Alex's course, and that's October 1st. But for anybody who's in this program, if you need to go and get approval to attend, we can keep that open until at least October the 10th if you're interested. So anybody who's signed up for this section. So thank you so much, William and Alex. You gave us a whirlwind tour, but I think you did it with a lot of practicality. And thank you for going through some of the different terminology and whatnot. And I'm seeing lots of thumbs up and clapping. So thank you so much, everybody. Give William and Alex a hand. And we hope to see all of you in the upcoming session on the 19th and 20th of November at the University of St. Michael's College. Thanks so much, guys. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.